Have you ever imagined coming home after a long, exhausting week, just craving a bit of peace, only to find a moving truck parked in your driveway, furniture scattered across the front steps, and a pregnant woman hanging decorations inside your own house? My name is Sarah Collins, 29 years old, a strategy consultant who just got promoted after months of soul-crushing work in the city. The only thing that kept me sane was the memory of my family's log cabin on the shores of Crystal Maple Lake, where my grandfather taught me how to fish, how to breathe, and how to trust myself. That place wasn't just property. It was sacred. It was memory. It was soul. It was legacy. And in a single moment, that sacred feeling was stolen. By who? By my cousin's husband, the man who not only cheated on his wife, but brought his pregnant mistress to legally live in my cabin, boldly setting up a crib, hanging pictures, even slapping decals on the walls of my favorite reading nook. Worse, he's been telling everyone that I gave him permission. This isn't just a story about inheritance. This is a battle between truth and manipulation, between kindness and exploitation, between someone trying to protect what matters and someone turning it into a power game. So, would you stand up for what's yours? Or let someone else redraw the boundaries of your life? Stay with me until the end to find out what I did when my reputation, the law, and even my own family got dragged into a storm of lies. But before we dive in, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss these gripping real-life stories and the powerful lessons that come with them. Let's get started. // I stood frozen at the threshold of the cabin, heart pounding, a storm of doubt and fury swelling inside me. But then, as if some strange defense mechanism kicked in, my mind drifted back to the golden summers at Crystal Maple Lake, to the magical little world that belonged only to my grandfather Walter and me. I remembered vividly the chill of bare feet touching the wooden floor each morning, birdsong echoing through the pine trees, and the smell of slightly burnt pancakes Grandpa used to make while muttering that breakfast made with a joyful heart digests better. He wasn't a man of flowery words, but every gesture, every glance, radiated a kind of unconditional love I've never felt from anyone else. He was the one who taught me how to lower the bait into the water without startling the fish. He showed me how to breathe steadily as I rode across wind-tossed waves. And he was the one who, when I broke down from my first panic attack at 15, led me to the dock, held my hand, and said, "Be still, listen to the lake, and let your fear drift away like the ripples fading beneath your feet." That cabin wasn't just a house. It was the living witness of my childhood, of the messy, uncertain years, and the countless times I fell apart, and he was the only one who reached down to pull me back up. While I wrestled with the chaos of city life and a marketing world that treats kindness like weakness, that cabin was the only place where I could peel off the social mask and just breathe like a real person. I'll never forget that autumn afternoon 3 years ago, when Grandpa looked me square in the eyes and said, "Sarah, this place needs you. Not because you need to run from the world, but because this place is part of you. And when you protect it, you're protecting yourself." What I once thought were simply the tender words of family now echo like a prophecy, a warning that one day I would have to stand up and fight for something you can't measure in dollars. And bitter as it is, that day has come. But it's exactly because of that I know this much. If I stay silent, if I allow someone else to trespass on my memories, then there's nothing left that's truly mine. And I won't let that happen. Not now. Not ever. // I knew the day Grandpa Walter passed away would change everything. But I never expected the very first thing to be tested would be the trust between family. After the quiet funeral, we all gathered at the main house in Hollow Creek, where his attorney read the will. I can still hear his voice playing from that recording, frail, yet firm, as he evenly distributed his investments and savings among the family members. But when it came to the cabin, his tone shifted, lower, almost breaking. He made it clear that the cabin at Crystal Maple wasn't just property. It was the soul of our family, a vessel of memory and growth. And because of that, he decided to leave it entirely to me. Not because I was the most successful grandchild, not because I was the only one still single, but because I was the one who understood what that place meant and would never turn it into a bargaining chip, a power play, or a tool for control. The room fell silent for a moment after the recording ended. Then my cousin Lucy hugged me tightly and whispered he was right. But her husband, Brent, couldn't hide his displeasure. He forced a polite smile, mumbled a half-hearted congratulations, and poured himself another drink like he was trying to swallow his resentment. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, in the look in his eyes. He wasn't just disappointed. He was calculating. In the weeks that followed, Brent started revealing his intentions. He tried to rope me into these casual, almost coaxing conversations, talking about how the cabin was too big for just one person. How he and Lucy had always dreamed of raising kids in the countryside, far from city pollution. His tone was gentle, but his eyes were constantly scanning, measuring my reactions. And when I just smiled and let it pass, neither agreeing nor refusing, he grew bolder. He suggested we share the cabin. Half for me, half for him and Lucy. Said it was only fair. That it was about keeping it in the family. About honoring Grandpa's legacy together. But I knew better. It wasn't fairness. It was a subtle invasion, dressed up in sentiment. I didn't give him a clear answer. Partly because we were still mourning Grandpa. Partly because I didn't want to turn it into a confrontation. But now I see it. Ambiguity is a door. And Brent, with all his pleasant manners and practiced charm, was already stepping through it. In the name of family, he was slowly eroding my boundaries, one careful step at a time. // just a few weeks after the funeral, the fragile peace in our family began to crack, visibly, irreversibly. Brent no longer wore his polite mask. During a family dinner at Lucy's parents' house, he suddenly brought up the cabin with a tone laced in suggestion, right in front of everyone. He raised his glass, smiled, and half-joked, but not really, that it would be wonderful for Lucy to rest during her pregnancy somewhere fresh and serene like the cabin, far from the pollution and honking of Hollow Creek. My mother gave a tight-lipped smile. My father glanced at me, waiting to see how I'd respond. I stayed composed, but inside, the waves had started to churn. Brent pressed on, this time dropping all pretense. He declared the cabin was an emotional asset for the whole family, that no one had the right to monopolize collective memories, and that Grandpa Walter surely wouldn't have wanted to see his granddaughter acting selfishly. Each word fell like a drop of venom, slow, calculated, and corrosive. He wasn't just speaking, he was crafting a narrative. One where I became the villain. One where my inheritance became the family's excuse to question my character. The dining room grew heavy with discomfort. Lucy kept her eyes on her plate, silent, as if unsure whose side to take. But I knew, deep down, she felt the tension too. She could sense that this wasn't about property anymore. This was about control. Not over the cabin. Over me. I answered calmly but firmly. I reminded everyone that the cabin was left to me, unconditionally, and that I wouldn't entertain any discussions about sharing it until I decided it was appropriate. Brent scoffed, then dropped a line that made everyone at the table freeze. It's a shame, really, when something that once belonged to the whole family becomes someone's personal asset. Then he turned to Lucy, rested his hand on her belly, and added, a child needs a place to begin, and the cabin would be perfect for that. For the first time, I saw Brent for what he truly was, not a disappointed man turned away, but a manipulator. Someone who used moral language as a weapon. Someone who didn't need your consent, just your silence, and a guilt you couldn't quite name, to get exactly what he wanted. I left the dinner early that night, but as I walked out the door, I knew this wasn't a minor family disagreement anymore. This was the beginning of something much bigger, something that went beyond property lines. This was about the right to draw my own boundaries, and to defend them from those who hide behind blood ties to breach them. // It was a Wednesday night, and I was drained, finishing up the last lines of a report after an exhausting day when my phone buzzed. Lucy's name lit up the screen. I hesitated, already guessing she wanted to bring up the cabin again. But her voice wasn't the same. It was quiet, shaky, and laced with something I hadn't expected. Pain. Sarah, Brent, and I broke up. 3 weeks ago. I'm staying at my mom's now. I dropped my pen, stunned. They were the golden couple in everyone's eyes, college sweethearts, building their careers together, always a team. I listened as she spoke, her voice breaking like glass. Brent had been having an affair for nearly a year with a coworker named Monica. And now Monica was 7 months pregnant. My chest tightened. Not just because Brent had betrayed Lucy, but because it all happened while the family was gathered around Grandpa's deathbed. While I was changing bandages, cooking porridge, and Lucy was handling medical paperwork, Brent was quietly building another life with someone else. When I asked her why she hadn't told me sooner, Lucy sighed. I was ashamed, and I didn't want it to make things harder for you, not with Brent clinging to the cabin like it's his lifeline. I felt a mix of fury and dread. Suddenly, everything made sense. Brent's talk about starting a family at the cabin, how fresh air would be good for a newborn. He was using that unborn child as leverage to stake a claim that was never his. This wasn't subtle anymore. This was calculated. I reassured Lucy and promised to visit her that weekend. But later that same night, I got a text from an unknown number. "Sarah, it's me, Brent. I need a favor. Could I borrow the cabin for a few days? Just me. I'm in a tight spot." I stared at the screen, my blood simmering. The man who had shattered my cousin's world was now turning to me like nothing had happened. "Iraplia, no, Brent. That doesn't work for me." He answered right away, "Come on. I'm in between places." That cabin's been sitting empty all week. Just a couple of nights. I didn't respond, but he didn't stop. I thought family helped each other when it mattered. And right then, I understood this wasn't a simple request. This was the first move in an intentional push. A manipulator, when denied, will always twist the story, will always try to make you feel like the villain. But this time, I wasn't letting it happen. Not again. Not ever. I didn't reply to that message. I didn't even open the thread again. But the next morning, another text appeared. "You're being unreasonable. Monica, and I just need a quiet place for a few days. If you're not using the cabin, why not share a little?" I gripped my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Share a little? With the man who lied, who betrayed my cousin, and who is now trying to spin some tragic tale in a desperate bid to seize the last peaceful place left in my life. I told Lauren, my best friend since college. She nearly slammed her chopsticks down on the table when she heard it. Unbelievable. He's trying to guilt you into submission. Classic. And dangerous. I nodded. I understood. I could see the precision in Brent's manipulation, how smoothly he worked guilt like a noose, wrapping it around your neck until you couldn't breathe, until saying no made you feel like the villain. Lauren looked at me dead serious. "You need to shut it down. No ambiguity." No cracks for him to slip through. That night, I sent Brent one final message. I read it over and over, edited every sentence, every period, until there was nothing left to interpret. "Let me be clear. You do not have permission to use my cabin. Not this weekend. Not ever. You do not have my consent, and I am asking you not to go there, not to bring it up again, and not to cross this boundary ever again." The reply came within seconds. A single emoji. Like I thought it would end there. But I underestimated what desperation can make a person do when they realize they're losing everything. That Friday afternoon, drained from 4 brutal days on a major project, I left work early, craving nothing more than the cabin. The forest air. The stillness of the lake. A glass of red wine as the sun dipped behind the trees. Just that, and I'd be whole again. But as I turned onto the dirt road leading to the cabin, my heart plummeted into my stomach. A moving truck sat squarely in the driveway. Cardboard boxes were scattered across the yard. Through the front window, I saw Monica, heavily pregnant, hanging baby decorations on the wooden walls where my grandfather's paintings used to hang. My reading room had been transformed into a nursery, yellow wallpaper and woodland animals covering every inch. I couldn't breathe. Every boundary had been shattered. This wasn't a request anymore. It wasn't subtle. Brent had decided, on his own, that he had the right to take what wasn't his. And worse, he had brought Monica with him, a woman who clearly had no idea she was the centerpiece in a quiet invasion. In that moment, it wasn't just anger I felt. It was betrayal. Not only by Brent, but by the silence of my family. By how easily the people closest to me chose to believe the polished facade and ignore the truth behind it. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and slowly stepped out of the car. There was no turning back now, and I swore I would not let anyone turn my grandfather's legacy into a battleground. Not without a fight. Backslash, I stood on the porch, torn between a rising fury and the last thread of composure I had left. I had said no, clearly, firmly, and yet Brent had ignored every boundary, bringing Monica, a pregnant woman, to this place as if some unspoken agreement had granted them the right to call it home. I stepped onto the wooden stairs, my hands trembling slightly, but steady. Each footfall felt like I was walking over memories I once held sacred. Grandpa Walter's laughter, the scent of burning pine wood, the shimmer of summer sunsets dancing across the lake. Those memories were now overwritten by the smell of cardboard and plastic wrap, by unopened boxes, and by lullaby music humming from a Bluetooth speaker in the living room. I unlocked the door with my key, stepped inside, and called out, "Excuse me, who's here?" Monica appeared from the bedroom, startled. She looked to be in her early 30s, her eyes tired but kind. In her hands was a string for a baby mobile, tiny pandas and foxes dangling midair. When she saw me, her face flickered, confusion, then surprise. "Oh, you must be Amanda, right? Brent said you'd be coming by to help with the move." I stood still for a moment. Amanda? She thought I was Brent's sister? I took a deep breath, grounding myself.
No, I'm Sarah Collins.
I'm the legal owner of this cabin. She froze, her eyes blinking fast in disbelief. The owner?
Yes.
My grandfather left this place to me. Brent has no right to move in here. I never gave him permission. She took a step back, instinctively cradling her belly. Her face went pale. But Brent said he told me this cabin was part of the family estate, that you had agreed to let us stay for a few months, especially with the baby coming. He said we'd be welcomed here. It felt like the air had been sucked from the room. Brent hadn't just invaded my home. He'd fabricated an entire narrative, casting me as the benevolent cousin who generously allowed him and his mistress to take shelter here. "Monica," I said gently. "I never said that. In fact, I explicitly told Brent he wasn't allowed to be here, and certainly not to bring anyone else. I'm sorry you're in this position, but you being here, it's not legal." Before I could say anything more, tires screeched outside. I turned toward the window just as Brent stepped out of his black pickup truck, carrying a takeout bag, whistling like a man returning home from a long day. His eyes met mine through the open door. He paused for a split second, just long enough to register, but then smiled, smug and unbothered. "Sarah, didn't expect you until tomorrow. Thought you said you were coming by then." I faced him directly. My voice was ice. "I never said I'd come tomorrow, and I never gave you permission to be here." He set the food bag on the counter and looked up, lips curled in that hollow smirk. "Come on, don't make this a thing. Monica's pregnant. We just needed somewhere quiet for a while. The cabin's huge, and you're not using it. What's so wrong about sharing a little?" I stared him down, not because I didn't have anywhere else to go, but because I refused to let manipulation disguise itself as reason. I refused to let emotional blackmail become the currency of trespass. "You're living in a fantasy, Brent. And today it ends." // the room went still, as if the very air was holding its breath, waiting to see who would blink first. Monica stood frozen in the bedroom doorway, hand resting on her belly, eyes flicking between me and Brent, trying to make sense of how two versions of the truth could be so wildly at odds. Brent, on the other hand, didn't flinch. He took a slow step toward me, his voice dropping, syrupy sweet in a way that made my skin crawl. "Sarah, you're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. I know you're exhausted, work's been crazy, and losing your grandfather. I get it, but this is family. We help each other, remember?" I didn't respond. I simply pulled out my phone, scrolled to our previous texts, and held the screen up to his face, where I had clearly, unequivocally told him he was not allowed at the cabin. "I said no," I said. "I was explicit. And you still showed up with moving boxes and with the woman you cheated on my cousin with, like this place belongs to you." Brent glanced at the screen, then gave a slight laugh and stepped in closer. "Why are you making this difficult? The neighbors already think we moved in to help look after the place for you. I told them about you. The sweet, emotional granddaughter who's still grieving. I said we were just staying to keep things in order while you're tied up in the city. They were really supportive, you know?" His words cut deeper than any insult. He hadn't just invaded my space, he'd rewritten my story. In their eyes, I was a fragile girl, too unstable to manage her own inheritance. He was positioning himself as the reasonable one, the hero. I tightened my grip on my phone. "Are you threatening me with the opinions of the neighbors? Hoping that if I call the cops, I'll be the one who looks unhinged?" He stepped even closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "If you call the police, who do you think they'll believe? A woman on the edge, overworked, grieving, or a man with a pregnant partner, just trying to find a peaceful place for their baby?" That was the moment. The flicker in his eyes. It wasn't fear. It was challenge. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't that version of Sarah anymore. Not the one who shrunk to keep the peace. Not the one who mistook silence for strength. I stepped back, lifted my phone, and hit record, steadying my voice until it was granite. "Brent Taylor, you do not have permission to be here. You are not authorized to move in, to change the locks, or to claim this as your residence. You are trespassing on private property. I am asking you to leave, now." Brent froze when he realized I was filming. The smile cracked, slipped, and vanished. Rage spilled into its place. "Turn that off, Sarah." "What the hell are you doing?" I took another step back, camera still up. "If you touch me or this phone, that's assault. And I swear to God, I will not stay quiet." Right then, Monica stepped slowly out of the room, eyes red, lips trembling. "Brent, you said this was family property." "You told me." She agreed. He spun toward her, voice sharp and slicing. "Not the time, Monica.
Go lie down.
I'll handle this." But Monica didn't move. She looked at me, then at him, and slowly, she dropped her hands from her belly. "Sarah?"
I'm sorry.
"I didn't know. I don't want to be somewhere I'm not wanted. I don't want my child's life to start with a lie." My heart clenched. Monica wasn't the enemy. She was just another casualty like Lucy had been. And then, suddenly, she winced and doubled over, grabbing her stomach. I rushed to her side. She was breathing hard, eyes squeezed shut. Probably just a light contraction. I've been having these on and off all day. I looked up at Brent. But he just stood there, frozen, unsure whether to come forward or back. For once, he was speechless. Because this was the part he hadn't rehearsed. The part that required real care. Real responsibility. I led Monica gently out to my car. My mind already made up. I would take her to the hospital. As for Brent, he could start packing. His time here was over. The hospital was over 40 minutes from the cabin, but the whole drive was filled only with the sound of Monica's heavy breathing and the thunder of my own heartbeat pounding like war drums. Every time she gripped the seat, I pressed the gas a little harder. Beneath my worry was a fire I couldn't put out, anger spreading like dry brush in a windstorm. She had been deceived, brought into a house that wasn't hers, used as a pawn in Brent's game. I had been violated, my reputation distorted, backed into a corner where any pushback made me look like the villain throwing a pregnant woman out of her home. And the one who started all of it? Still standing, still calculating, waiting for someone else to collapse first. At the ER, the doctor confirmed what I suspected, Braxton Hicks contractions brought on by stress and dehydration. Not true labor, but serious enough that she needed rest. I took her to a modest hotel near the hospital and prepaid 3 nights. She sat at the edge of the bed, arms around her belly, her eyes red but clear. I don't even know what to say. I really thought he was a good man. I sat beside her, not touching, not crowding, just speaking gently. He knows how to build a perfect image. He fooled my cousin for nearly 10 years while sneaking around with you. And now that both of you have found out, he's clinging to the one thing he still thinks is value, my cabin. Monica dropped her head. I should have questioned him when he talked about the cabin like it was his. But at the time, I didn't want to move back in with my mom. I didn't have anyone, and I believed him. I looked at her and felt the weight in my chest begin to ease. Not everyone is strong all the time. Not everyone has a place to run to. And clearly, Monica wasn't the accomplice. She was the collateral damage of Brent's choices, wrapped in sugar-coated words and false promises. I left her my number, told her to rest, and drove back to the cabin. I wasn't surprised to find the light still on, and the door unlocked. Brent sat on the porch in one of the wooden chairs, no longer wearing that smug confidence. Maybe Monica's silence had finally shown him the narrative was slipping from his grasp. Still, he managed a half-smile when he saw me. She okay? I stepped closer, standing tall, like a boundary carved into the ground. She needs rest, and you need to leave.
Now.
Before this turns into something that can't be resolved quietly. Brent squinted, clinging to the last threads of his imagined authority. I've got mail here. Temporary residence, paperwork. Utility bills in my name. You know what that means, don't you? I nodded slowly. It means you're building a false residency record. And when I show the police the text messages, the videos, the witness statements, and the deed with my name on it, you'll be out of options. I've already called my attorney. If you don't leave on your own, law enforcement will be here tomorrow. With a warrant. Brent shot up from the chair, face flushed with rage. You think you're better than me, Sarah? You think you can hold on to this place forever? You live here alone, no husband, no kids. You don't deserve a place like this. I met his eyes, unwavering. I don't need a husband or a child to justify holding on to what's mine. I only need one thing, integrity. And that's something you've never had. His fists clenched, then slowly unclenched. His voice dropped to a snarl. "You'll regret this." I didn't flinch. I just took a step back, pulled out my phone, and started recording. This time, he turned away, saying nothing, closing the door behind him with a silence that spoke more than threats ever could. The next morning, I returned to the cabin earlier than usual. My heart hadn't settled. Part of me hoped that after our confrontation the night before, Brent would have packed his things and left quietly. But I had been naive. When I opened the door, I froze. The furniture was overturned. Chairs lay scattered, the coffee table shattered into splinters. The picture frames of Grandpa Walter, once lovingly hung on the walls, had been torn down, their glass shattered across the floor. In the corner, the old bookcase my grandfather had built with his own hands was missing a door. Books lay strewn across the room like the aftermath of a storm. I stood trembling. The cabin was no longer safe. It had been violated, desecrated. Not in a moment of anger, but with calculated malice. This wasn't a loss of control. It was retaliation. Punishment for refusing to yield. I immediately called the sheriff's office in Maple Ridge. They arrived within 30 minutes. Deputy Harris, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a steady presence, walked through the cabin and didn't need long to understand what had happened. I showed her the video I recorded the night before, the text messages, and the photo evidence. She nodded firmly. "This is enough to proceed with charges for unlawful entry and property damage. If you wish, we can issue a restraining order. He won't be allowed within 100 feet of this property under any circumstances." I nodded without hesitation. "I want that." After the officers left, I began to clean. I couldn't wait any longer. This cabin would not become a battlefield for manipulators hiding behind the mask of family. As I swept up the broken glass and carefully picked up the shards of memory, I opened a drawer in the desk and found a file folder Brent had left behind. Probably part of his little residency plan. But it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a plan. It was debt. A long list of unpaid bills from small credit lenders, bank fees and arrears, a warning from a local financial bureau stating that his accounts were being frozen, and worst of all, a formal eviction notice from his apartment complex. The address matched the one Brent claimed was still home. I sank to the floor, the truth crushing down like stone. He didn't want the cabin because of sentiment. He needed it. It was survival. A roof, running water, electricity, somewhere to hide from the collapse of his carefully maintained image. But more than that, it was a weapon. A relic of emotional value he could twist into a justification for his presence. A way to look legitimate, sympathetic, entitled. This wasn't about greed. This was desperation masquerading as strategy. I folded the documents and slipped them into the evidence pouch. This was no longer a family dispute. This was reality, raw and brutal. When a man has nothing left to lose, he will trample on memory, on trust, and on decency, just to keep standing. And that is exactly why I had to protect this place. Not just for me, but for Grandpa Walter, and for anyone who still believes that family should mean something good. After Brent was officially forced to leave the cabin, I spent the entire weekend restoring what was left of its order. Amanda, my cousin, drove in from Hartford at sunrise, arms full of coffee, rubber gloves, and a bag of warm cinnamon waffles. We hugged, tightly, longer than usual, without needing to say a word. Her presence, for the first time in weeks, made me feel like I wasn't alone in this battle anymore. We spent most of the morning sweeping up broken glass, reassembling the bookshelves, and removing every trace of Brent and Monica. This space needed to reclaim its stillness, its dignity. But while we were tidying up the reading room, Amanda gently pulled me aside and pointed to an old drawer tucked beneath the window. Inside was a weathered leather journal. Faintly etched into the cover were the words, Walter M. Collins, Private Notes. I opened it, and page after page of my grandfather's handwriting unfurled like a message sent through time. One passage in particular stopped me cold. The cabin isn't property, it's a responsibility. The person who holds it must understand its unseen value. Not everyone will, but Sarah will. It belongs to her not because she needs it, but because it needs her. I closed the journal slowly, tears slipping down onto my hands. He had known. He had foreseen all of it. Grandpa hadn't left me the cabin as a gift. He'd entrusted it to me as a vow. Amanda placed a hand gently on my shoulder. He was right, you know. No one else could have protected this place the way you have. I nodded. Not because I felt strong, but because I knew I couldn't let the legacy of the person I loved most be warped. I couldn't let kindness be weaponized. I couldn't let boundaries be erased by those who wrap their entitlement in the cloak of family. This cabin had once been a sanctuary for me. Now it stood for something greater: resolve. The courage to say no, even to those who once called themselves family. // a few days later, once Monica had settled into a women's support center in the nearby town, I stopped by to visit her, carrying a small bag of things she had left behind at the cabin: a few sets of clothes, an ultrasound photo in a wooden frame, and a well-worn pregnancy guide with a cracked spine. Monica opened the door looking tired, but her eyes were steadier than before. "I'm trying to get everything back in order," she said as she took the bag from my hands. "This place is really kind. They've got counseling, prenatal classes. I know I need to start over." I sat with her in the small but tidy room, sunlight filtering in through the window and falling across a makeshift baby hammock suspended by fabric cords. There was a calm there, a sense of quiet she hadn't known in a long time. "Has Brent tried to contact you?" I asked gently. She shook her head.
No.
After I told him I wasn't going back to the cabin and that I'd raised the baby without him, he sent a few long messages blaming me for everything, and then silence. I blocked him. I need peace now. No more chaos. I looked at her, and what I felt wasn't pity, but admiration. This woman, once caught in the grasp of manipulation, once silenced by fear and pretty words, was now choosing to break free. To begin again. That kind of strength doesn't shout. It rebuilds, quietly, bravely. Before I left, Monica hugged me tight. "You know," she whispered, "I used to think setting boundaries was selfish. But now I get it. It's how you live a healthy life. You showed me that, and I'm going to teach my child the same thing." As I drove back to the cabin, I felt something lift, like a weight finally leaving my chest. I've started a new ritual now. Every morning, I write a few lines in Grandpa Walter's journal. Not to continue his story exactly, but to carry it forward, in my own voice. Because sometimes, protecting a place isn't just about building walls. It's about sending a message. If you want to enter, you need to respect what's inside. If you've ever had to fight to protect something that belongs to you, your space, your boundaries, your very self, I hope this story gives you a little strength. And if you saw any part of yourself in this journey, leave a comment below. Tell me how you made it through. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to follow me in the stories to come. Stories where we learn how to stand tall, even when the world around us starts to shake.